Hi, Chicago. Great to see you.
Hello. Hello, thanks for coming.
It's a good-looking crowd, David.
Yeah. We have become tremendous Chicago fans in the last 24 hours, I would say.
We lived a week in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, so we can't
You
tell
go to
you all
Rosa's
about
Lounge,
it.
you really can live a week and a night.
Yes. So we'll jump into it, and we're going to talk for 40 minutes or so. We could talk longer, but then we're going to hear from you with your questions. So everybody should think of a question, because if no one has a question, I will start to call on people. So just in case, have a question
This
ready.
is a university. You can do that.
I know. Of course I can.
And I'm on book tour, so I'm like judging each city by whether its questions are better and more abundant. So just know that you're in like a competition with the rest of the nation.
Right. It's a bit funny to me. I had a book that came out a couple of weeks ago, and it's kind of a bookend to yours. It's called American Psychosis, and it is a history of how the Republican Party over the last 70 years has tried to exploit and encourage extremism. The point being that there's nothing new with what Trump is doing. It may be intensified and more extreme, but it's always been part of the DNA of the Republican Party and the conversation it has tried to have with its own base and with the political culture at large. And in your book, you're looking at people, mainly people on the left, who are trying to figure out how to have honest conversations, both with each other and with people who might not share their views, and to determine in this highly tribalized, divisive political environment that we live in now, whether there is room for persuasion and change, and what we used to think of as debate in this country over policy matters and key things that get people riled up. Now, it was interesting to me that you start your book by looking at the IRA. Now, I'm not talking about the Inflation Reduction Act or the Irish Republican Army. I'm talking about the Internet Research Agency, which was a big part of my previous book. This was the troll farm set up in St. Petersburg that targeted the 2016 election here and has worked around the world to try to encourage and seed and exacerbate divisiveness, and by using propaganda, disinformation, and the like. And it was very effective. I believe it was one of the factors that led to Donald Trump's election in 2016. And then from there, you jump to the internal debate within the women's movement, the Women's March that we remember from 2017. And what struck me was, if you look at the operations of the IRA, there's no question about unity there. There is a degree of purposefulness. We're going to use information to try to politically destroy our enemies, and they have a very strong strategic cohesion. And then you jump to progressives trying to deal with the Women's March, and the conversation is not about how best to necessarily confront political foes, but how do we get along ourselves? There seems to be a bit of asymmetry there. You want to talk about this?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you all for coming. It's an amazing thing, particularly in this moment and climate when people still actually have questions and want to learn and come to a humanities festival, are interested in books, interested in ideas. That itself is an incredible thing in a time when those values are under threat. So thank you for being here. I think the motivation, the impetus for the book, The Persuaders, is that, you and I were talking about this last night, the contest in America politically is no longer what it was in many of our lifetimes. Although, as you say, these trends are long running. But it's not a contest between 31% and 39% marginal tax rates, or this way of delivering healthcare to people, or that way of delivering healthcare to people, or should we have an estate tax or not have an estate tax. It is now a contest between a pro-democracy side and an anti-democracy side, right? I mean, I don't even think Republicans and Democrats is a particularly useful frame anymore. There is a pro-democracy movement in this country and an anti-democracy movement. And as I looked out on what was happening in the last few years, it seemed to me that with the help of, with Russian encouragement, building on what we were doing to ourselves and each other, the pro-democracy movement, to be frank, is simply not winning. And it's not just not winning, and here this is a provocative point, but I think it's true. The anti-democracy movement is doing a whole bunch of shenanigans and unfair play. There's no question, right? Voter suppression, gerrymandering, some things that are just inbuilt in our system, like the Electoral College, which amplifies minority views, the Senate, Steve Bannon's army of state election fiddlers, all that's happening, unfair play. Here's the provocative point. I don't think the pro-democracy movement is struggling to win simply because of the unfair play. I actually think it is struggling to win hearts and minds. I don't think it's winning the argument. If the fight was completely fair, I think we would still be losing the argument for the future. And one simple source of evidence for that is polling. There's no voter suppression in polling. Polling is just calling people on the phone and asking them what they think. And right now, we are calling people on the phone, thousands of people. Every day, there's a new poll. And asking them, do you want one movement that is committed to political violence as a legitimate tool of getting the world you want and overthrowing free and fair election results? And about 46% of Americans on the phone are saying yes. I don't believe that that is false consciousness or that there's the polls are being rigged. I absolutely take very seriously that 46% of Americans absolutely want that world. And so it seems to me a pro-democracy movement that is only polling at 46% is an abject failure. And we need to understand what is it that has allowed a completely dystopian far-right movement to command so much allegiance, to make people so excited, to make people so loyal for awful purposes. But hats off on building a real movement on that side, where a lot of people are revved up to participate in their own destruction. That is some incredible movement building. And on the pro-democracy side, there is and we can get into the details, but there is a smugness about we're doing the right thing, so it's self-explanatory. We stand for the right policies, so people should just get it. People are telling us they fear inflation. We should explain to them that's not as important as democracy. People are telling us they fear crime. We should tell them they're wrong if you actually do the right regressions. We don't need messaging because, we know in our hearts we're helping people. I came to the very simple and devastating conclusion that we've gotten a lot better on the pro-democracy side at condemning fascism than outcompeting it. And that there's no plan to outcompete it. There's no plan to build a galvanizing, thrilling, open-hearted, feisty, rooted, locally connected, small e evangelical movement to win souls, win hearts and minds, and bury fascism in the garbage dump of history. And I decided, I didn't have the answers to this in my own heart, so I set out to report and spend time with organizers, activists, cognitive scientists, a cult deprogrammer, because that's where we are now, and others, but particularly organizers who are showing a new way for the pro-democracy side. And we can get into some of the tactics and methods I learned from them, but the biggest thing I'll say about all the methods I learned from them is that the pro-democracy movement is barely even attempting most of the things that those organizers think will work. And that is good news, because if we were leaving it all on the field and polling 46-46, then the country would be over. But actually, the pro-democracy movement has not even turned on some of the engines that would be crucial to defeating this movement. And this book is a plea through the stories of people doing this work on the ground, to learn from them, to do what they're doing at the scale of the nation. And I deeply believe that if we do that, we can bury that movement and put it where it belongs.
Now, some of you might have seen the New York Times story a couple days ago that was very worrisome to many, in which 71% in a poll said that they believe democracy is at risk. Now, some of those people answering yes to that question probably believe that because the election was stolen from Donald Trump. But still, a majority of Americans believe democracy is at risk. Not just a majority, an overwhelming majority. And then only 7% said it was an important priority for them. That's a pretty stunning drop-off. And you call this, you just referred to this multiple times, as a pro-democracy movement. I certainly think that is an accurate description. There is one side that doesn't riot, that wants to abide by election results, that wants to increase democracy in terms of expansion of voting rights and voting opportunities, and one side that doesn't want any of that. And so, but in terms of mobilizing people, the idea that you're fighting for democracy, that we're the pro-democracy side, doesn't seem at this point in time to be gaining traction. Whether it's, and you can come up with the obvious idea that people are more concerned and consumed by the difficulties they face every day, whether it's inflation, gas prices, economic security, healthcare, education, safety, than they are about what happens with gerrymandering or voting rights. And so the people in your book, a lot of them are not working towards this abstract notion of protecting democracy. A lot of it is very granular. Let's get DACA into Build Back Better. Let's defeat Proposition 8 in California. And it's the left kind of going and doing a lot of different things that overlap. They do intersect, as the young ones say these days, and that's important. But it's, I think, a lot different than the other side, which is basically a big no to a lot of things. So looking at all these various efforts that you report on, do you see them knitting themselves somehow into something grander and bigger that will have a bumper sticker?
Yeah, it needs it. And when I talk about the pro-democracy movement, I'm not proposing that as the bumper sticker, right? Like, I'm having a meta conversation about what the many things they need to do. One of the really striking things I learned from these organizers and others that I studied is that I think on the right, there is a real understanding that a lot of what ends up in politics begins in the realm of emotion and psychology, right? Like, before people vote or even have a stance in their own head, they feel things. They feel, in particular, when we talk about politics, they feel fear, they feel anxiety, about all kinds of, all of us, right? Or they feel hope, or they feel a generosity of spirit, they feel love. There's a lot of the kind of, before you have a stance on the border, you see family separation, and that does different things to different people. And I would argue, my understanding of politics, that ends up in stances. Or you are experiencing change in your small town, and you notice there's suddenly a lot more Spanish-speaking people in your town. That's just an observation. It takes a lot of meaning-making and processing to become this fear of immigrants. Or you see Barack Obama give a speech in 2004. On its own, for most people, that doesn't turn them into this, oh, like this is the redemption of the ideals of the nation. It takes a lot of processing and meaning-making. And what the right understands is that this meaning-making, taking people from the observation, the simple observation in their own lives, the thing their kids came home and said to them about, is America a bad country? That's what I learned in school. The stuff that just all of us experience, these stimuli as citizens. The right is very good at understanding that the real work of politics is to take people from those stimuli to the stance that you want. So the right is not just asking you to chip in $5 10 times a day and vote. The right is actually walking with its people all the time. Its media is fully oriented towards starting with the backing into the fears and anxieties you have. You could almost imagine the project of the right today as starting with an astute anthropological understanding of the fears and anxieties that are there, and then saying, how can I get you from there to the agenda that I want that's going to benefit kind of a handful of billionaires? And when I look at the left, the pro-democracy side, the Democratic Party, call it whatever you want, I think there is instead a starting with, like, they're like vendors who are like, I got these watches. Right? And voters are like, I have a watch. And they're like, yeah, but I have watches.
It's a better watch.
You know, it's a better watch. I don't need to know the time. Yeah, but have you seen these watches, right? And I think that happens on climate policy. It's not saying we don't need to do it, but we start with, like, I know you're afraid of crime in your neighborhood, but it may not matter if the planet ends. It's very, like, I call it demsplaining. Like, it's a kind of like, you think you're scared of this, but let me tell you, like, the data doesn't support what you are scared of, or you shouldn't be scared of it, or, like, the thing you're scared of is bad, but, like, a much bigger bad thing is going to happen to you, so please reprioritize your fear. It's wrong to feel anxious about the complexion of your town changing. Just all the things, that people just feel. And I think a smarter movement would say, I'm going to actually start with that same astute anthropological understanding of where people are, what's going on with them, the anxieties people have. And this has been, and this is at the heart of the Persuaders book, this has been an era, we don't sometimes think about this, this has been an era, the last 40, 50, 60 years, of extraordinary change in every area of life. I was a foreign correspondent in India right after college, and it was 8 or 9% GDP growth, similar to China, a little bit slower. And the society was being remade every 4 years, right? And I learned as a foreign correspondent, the story was in India, and I think it's part of why India is now run by a fascist government, people's sense of themselves, men and women's relations, families, what work was, how you treat your boss, all of it was being erased every 5 years in this very ancient culture that was suddenly growing so fast. And I cut my teeth as a reporter on that, and I came back here, and I realized that while we don't have 8 or 9% GDP growth, in many ways, this era has kind of been like that here in ways that I don't think we acknowledge or is not so obviously told, right? If you look at the tech revolution, just that by itself, every life has been changed by it. Everything, the way you communicate, the nature of your friendships, how you get educated, how you learn, your job, everybody's everything, right? Trading with China, that alone has changed every county in this country. It's changed the definition of masculinity in North Carolina and other places where people made stuff, gone in 3 years. Suddenly, sorry, you gotta find a new definition of how you have esteem in your community. If you think about areas of real progress on gender, right? It's not a single household in America that hasn't obviously been upended by a massive empowerment of women playing all the roles women can and want to play. But no household is not changed by it. No man is unchanged by the need for a new self-understanding and a need to relate differently to women. Racial and gender progress, demographic change. I could go on. You know these changes. And I basically think the right understands everything I just said, understands that it has left a lot of people kind of existentially homeless, like a little bit confused. Who am I in this new world? And it's not just bad people who feel that way, right? I mean, which man in this country is not in some ways caught today between old ways of being a man that worked for your dad and grandfather, new ways of being a man that your son has very confidently figured out, and you're like, I don't want to be like my grandfather, but I can't quite so effortlessly be as woke as my son, right? Which white person is not thinking about race, conscious of race, whether you're super woke or not woke, is not going to train, is not just thinking about whiteness as a concept, which was really not a concept people talked about when I was growing up. Which white person is not confronting that and grappling with it in a way that their parents and grandparents were not, so on and so forth. And the right gets that this is going on, gets that we are roiled by these questions about ourselves. And I think it's incumbent on those of us who want more democracy, more equality, more human rights, to actually understand, instead of hawking the watches in our jacket, to actually start with what is going on with people. Start with a really empathetic view, going on to people on our side, going on to people on the other side, going on to people in the middle. The reason I think we are losing groups that we should not be losing, Hispanic men, actually men of color in general, this is not just a white supremacist movement. There is a real failure to start with people's anxieties, start with people's emotions in an era of churn, and build a movement for good around that. And I think a lot of the organizers I write about in the book, they know how to do it. That's what they do in community. They don't start by hawking their wares. They start by building relationship based on who people are and what they're worried about. And I think it is possible for the pro-democracy movement to do this, to learn from it. But if you ever get DNC emails, you know it is not what they're doing now.
Yeah. I'll take one issue with what you just said, in that I don't think the Republicans have been astute. I think the exploitation of fear has been very easy for them to do and very obvious. I mean, my book starts with the McCarthy era, and you think about the change that was going on there. To get to your point of change, there was an existential change. All of a sudden, everyone realized their world could end in a moment, in a flash that you wouldn't even see. And there was great unease at the Cold War and the advent of nuclear terror. And first, a guy named Richard Nixon, some people might remember him, but then Joe McCarthy came along, did it even better, and they raised fear about internal subversion and the other side, the enemy destroying your country, as a way of explaining why you felt bad and uneasy and worried and scared. And it clicked. It worked really well. And then it worked well with the Southern strategy. It worked well with Reagan and the rise of the religious right. When the moral majority came into being, and Reagan embraced them, even as members of the moral majority were saying that gay people could be executed under God's law. You know, that was like, here, look at the change. Gay people are getting rights. And time again, Republicans have just said, let's push the fear button. It's not a very difficult thing to do. You know, there is, I think, you know, you mentioned psychology. There is, I think, somewhat of a psychological difference. And there's actually academic research on this between liberals and conservatives, and who respond more to motivations based on fear, motivations based on hope, and how you process threats. And it's, you know, it seems to be, given the way our brains work, that fear starts out in the advantageous position. And so the people in your book get this, and they know this, and they're responding to this, and they're trying to figure out how to work around it and come at this from different angles. And there's one person in particular I want to raise, because this was, to me, the most somewhat engaging and even inspiring chapter, because it was it ended up being very practical and pragmatic. Now, I'm betting a few people in this room are kind of concerned about the midterm elections, right? And you might even be looking at the Democrats, the Joe Biden, and wondering about the messaging that they're putting out, and whether that's powerful enough to counter the messaging from the Republicans, which are polling at 46% or so, after being the party supporting Donald Trump and supporting, more or less the rioting and the overturning of democracy. So I'm talking about Anat Shenker-Osorio, and you should describe a little bit who she is. But really, she has been out there for years working on messaging for progressives that I think really, really applies not just to the groups doing these individual campaigns on issues, but to the overall Democratic capital D project. And so, and I'm going to ask you also to describe to the audience, her ideas about not red meat, but blue meat, and why brownies are good. So I think I think it really ties into the abstract stuff worth talking about, but also the concerns people have about what's going to happen in 3 weeks.
Yeah, this is to be clear, we're kind of talking about the big ideas in the book, but this is not a big ideas book. This is a book about people and stories of people doing this work, right? Each chapter is about a story or a group of people or a person doing this. And one of the chapters toward the end is called The Art of Messaging, and it's about Anat Shenker-Osorio. How many of you know Anat Shenker-Osorio's work? A few people there. This is also just a very interesting thing about the left. Like, Anat Shenker-Osorio is the most important message person on the left. And it tells you a lot about the left that, like, no one knows the most important message person on the left, because the left establishment does not listen to the most important message person on the left. She's like, all the movement spaces use her, all the activist spaces. She has shaped the conversations you all have heard, what presidential candidates say, but would never be hired by this White House, would never be hired by the DNC, right? Even though everyone will tell you she is on the cutting edge of thinking of how Democrats can win against fascism in a time of racial division, et cetera. So I spent a lot of time with her over the past few years, last year of the Trump presidency and then the first year of Biden, as she was doing some work, first trying to make sure that there was a transition of power if Trump lost, and that it would actually be followed. She did a lot of behind-the-scenes work on how do you message that, and had very counterintuitive things to say there. Don't portray him as a strong man. It actually reinforces. They're like persuade people that he's a bumbling idiot who's trying to cling on to power because he knows he can't win. Just like these kinds of things that are not intuitive for me. Every time Anat says something, I'm like, oh, I do that wrong. And then when Biden won, getting some of the agenda in. So I followed her. She does these kind of secret Zooms with like 1,000 people who are all working on various phases of these things. And Anat's like the messaging guru. And so then when you are hearing some people say something on CNN or defend Build Back Better in this or those terms, it's often because someone like Anat just did a Zoom with 1,000 activists and organizers telling them how to frame these issues. And Anat's project, as I understand it, she is running a kind of one-woman insurgency against the Democratic Party's dominant approach to persuasion. This is not just use this phrase or that phrase. She is trying to turn the Democratic Party's approach to persuasion upside down. The existing reigning approach, I would call persuasion through dilution, which is Democrats will start with a kind of beautiful philosophical vision of a thing, healthcare for all people, or a humane immigration system or something like that. And then the idea is you persuade by adding a whole lot of water to that beautiful dream. And for any of you who are like home cooks here, you know that just adding a lot of water to something can sometimes make it like kind of disgusting. And so now you end up with this very thin gruel of like an immigration system that is like sort of a little more humane, but like deports a lot of people, or healthcare that is sort of for most people, but only through private insurance, and it may not cover a whole bunch of stuff you have. and these kind of democratic policies that we all know well. And the approach to persuasion that reflects is, it's this obsession with the white working class swing voter in like certain counties of Pennsylvania, Pennsyltucky it's called sometimes, and where if we water it down, maybe those people who think we're communists will not think we're communists. And we hope these really loyal voters who have been with us forever will just come along no matter what. And what often happens to Democrats is those people still think you're communists, and now you've left your base, who you owe a lot to, you've left them cold and sad, and you frankly have not taken care of them in a way justified by their enthusiasm for you. They've had your back, you haven't had theirs. Anand is trying to turn this upside down. Anand's theory of persuasion, which has grown more and more allegiance in the party, except for at the very top, is you persuade not by diluting and having thin gruel, but by standing very firmly and bravely in some ambitious truths and aspirations. And you actually dig your feet in. You become actually much more intransigent about a universal healthcare system or a humane immigration system. But then, with the self-confidence of someone who is quite dug in, you reach out through rhetoric, through an empathetic understanding of the moral intuitions of other people and speaking to them more effectively. You persuade by convincing people that there's actually a Christian case for fighting climate change, something the Democrats should be doing in a 70-something% Christian country that totally failed to do. You make arguments for something like Medicare for All, which, by the way, should be renamed Freedom Care, if you look at any opinion polling on values in this country. Should not be named after a government program, should be named after a value people hold. And then you should have all the rhetoric around something like Medicare for All be about how it would be a new birth of freedom in this country. How it would free you from your terrible bosses and free you from your stupid job. And you could, if you have a business idea, you can go do it because you wouldn't lose your health care and your kids wouldn't be left high and dry just because you pursued a dream, right? Like, there's so many ways to talk about so many things. And instead of doing this thing where you just cut your health care plan in half to appease people, maybe stick to something bold and then explain it. And so then Anand's work is, having dug in, how do you explain it? What are those ways to do it? And at the heart of her theory is, don't neglect those people who had your back. Don't neglect that base. Those are your people. Make them so excited about what you're doing. Give them something to talk about, as Bonnie Raitt said. And then they will talk about it to everybody around them. And you know what? They have friends, and they have neighbors, and they have coworkers, and they have cousins who are undecided. And
you know,
right? One last thing on that. And they will create an echo chamber around people. People, these persuadable, moderate voters that everybody's chasing. In Anand's analysis, they are not people in the middle. They are people who are torn. They are contradicted, as Beyonce says on her new album. They can think in different moral frames. They don't yet have a baked worldview the way many of you probably have a baked worldview as people who come to a humanities festival, right? It's really true, and this is maybe at the core of the book, is that we have forgotten that a lot of voters can toggle into completely different moral frames without that much effort, right? And we know this. Like, look at the progress on gay rights in this country, right? Look at the progress on recognizing the humanity of trans people. We're not there yet, but like, there's been a lot of motion. We need to give ourselves credit for the motion. Look at the conversations on race we're having. Look at the reckonings around gender we're having. Like, we move. Like, it's not true that nothing changes. And people are capable of reaching other conclusions. And we need to build the kind of movement that gives people something to talk about, so they're talking to everybody they know and exciting people. And I think what Anand is doing is game-changing if it can be listened to in the highest centers of power in this country.
And to just emphasize the point you glancingly made, to me what was most compelling in her case was this analysis that the people in the middle are not moderates per se, that she called being in the middle situational, not ideological. And the framework that both sides have tended to work with over the years is, okay, there are liberals here, there are conservatives there, people in the middle have to be a bit of both. And it's not that they're thinking in those terms. These are people full of contradictions and confusing ideas, and they can be won over. And the other thing, and we can get to this because we're going to turn to questions in one moment, is that when she talked about messaging, it was, and it kind of rang a bell. It was, messaging has to tend to be, on the Democratic liberal side, positive. So abolishing ICE, ending climate change, destroying white supremacy. She doesn't take issue with any of that, but these are all about negative things, yes. Defeating something negative rather than a inclusive society, a healthy economy and environment. And we tend to come along and say, there's a problem, it really sucks, and you have to pay attention to this. And
you're not donating enough.
You're not doing enough to, yes, you're not donating or doing enough to abolish white supremacy. And that works with a very small number of people who are already with you. And if the left or the progressive movement and the Democratic Party can't figure out how to do these more expansive and inspiring messages, they're not going to get those people who are bobbing about on the sea. Now, we have to go to questions.
I just want to say one quick thing about that, because that's such an important point. And this is not just a messaging thing, right? Like, saying you want a planet where we can all thrive versus saying end climate change is not just like a switching a sentence. Getting to positive demands actually requires further thinking that I think has often not happened or not happening, right? Like, even healthcare, even a positive demand like universal healthcare, it's still not pushing the thinking far enough. What does the world look like if we win, right? Like, there's this hospital ad in New York City that I've been seeing that's a great hospital ad, and the ad is "Stay amazing." Like, that's actually, like, no one values healthcare as a thing in itself. Healthcare is just a tool to, like, stay amazing, like, know your kids longer. Yeah. Right? So we don't...
Be able to chew your food, be able to hear your spouse, be able to see better.
Correct.
Right?
And so it's a discipline to get past, abolish ICE, great policy, right? But, like, what do we want? What do we want? What does the world look like when we win? Another of her mantras, paint the beautiful tomorrow.
Yeah, okay, so now we're going to go to your questions. And I think there's someone with a mic running about. Is that how it works?
Yes. All right, folks, so how this will work is if you have a question, please raise your hand, and myself or one of our front of house members will bring the microphone to you. When you receive the mic, please state your name and ask your question. Please keep your questions brief and to questions only. Anyone has a first question? So yes, questions, not speeches. And don't think we don't know the difference. Okay?
Hello, my name is Shayna. Thank you for this thrilling talk. My question is, in your research, what did you learn about a sense of urgency and time? Because I think particularly around the climate crisis, for a lot of us on the left, there is this sense of banging your head against the wall because every day matters, every second matters. So what did you learn about how activists are successfully tackling this sense of time and urgency?
I love that question, because climate is obviously the most dramatic of all of these situations. And I think one of the things I write about in the book is that I think there is a reflection going on, a reckoning going on within some of these climate spaces of Sunrise and others, a real reckoning about how the environmental movement over the last many decades went down a rhetorical course that kind of felt like downer and like homework, broccoli, like you are bad, like why do you eat meat, like you're bad, like why aren't you doing this, why aren't you doing that, like just haranguing, lecturing, like it's a, you know, and look, it's a movement to prevent the end of habitable life on Earth. So, like, forgive it for being dour, but I had this fascinating conversation with Varshini Prakash, who runs the Sunrise Movement, and others about this, where I think the younger generation is saying it was in a way a very privileged person's movement, because it was people who themselves were fine in life, and they could afford to like have this kind of great struggle and everything's terrible and dire. And for this, the conversation I'm hearing now that relates to the Persuaders on climate is, hold on, what would it look like to have a climate movement that dealt with that time challenge by being thrilling? By saying it's an awesome world we're gonna build because of the prompt of a changing climate. Like, we're gonna have blimps. Bill McKibben wrote this great piece about this. Like, why aren't we telling anybody about the blimps? Like, we're gonna have blimps, and it's gonna be so cool.
Not flying cars, but blimps.
But blimps, we're gonna get blimps. And we have to get blimps to do cargo, like, if we wanna fight this thing. But like, it's like, how come no one's selling us the blimps, but everybody's saying you can't eat beef? Like, both are probably part of the future. The blimp thing's probably more real than like people never eating beef anymore. But like, we know about the beef being taken away, but we don't know about the blimps. That's our failure, right? How come we go to West Virginia or Louisiana on oil, West Virginia? You don't have to tell these people that the way they're living is bad. They have black lung and we don't. But they're clinging to it, and I think that's on us, not on them. I don't think we have offered them a package of the future that feels more fun, more exciting. You know, we're going to be able to fix things on racial justice and the architecture of this country because of climate that we would never have fixed for any other reason. Because there's going to be money, and there already is that money, to do a bunch of reparative stuff around transport, around housing, around all kinds, right? Like, why can't we tell a story about the kind of amazing racial progress that's going to happen because of climate? Like, there's this whole, we like back up down the road we went down. There's a whole other road we could have gone down of offering people a thrilling, galvanizing, all-hands-on-deck project of making the kind of society we should always have been living in with the prompt of climate. And there's been a total failure to do that. And it's not only more effective, but it's a true story. And so and I'll leave you on this. I did an interview with Steve Bannon a few years ago. I was writing a profile of Bernie Sanders for Time magazine, and I wanted to understand what people on the right thought of Bernie. And we got into a conversation actually about AOC with Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon said to me, and I hope he's thinking of this in prison now.
I'm sure that's all he's thinking about.
I think he was sitting in front of a picture of a monkey drinking a Coke, like a painting. And he said to me, AOC is the only person on the left that I fear. And I said, why is she the only person on the left you fear? And he said, I said, why? And he said, because she understands. And he wasn't endorsing this view, but her understanding of the world is that climate is the thing that stands both kind of above and below all other things, and is the only thing that is so huge that at some point we'll have no choice but to face it. At some point everyone will come around to like not wanting to die. Whereas everything else is just like an ongoing contest forever, right? And he said she understands that climate will justify a whole of society mobilization to do 1,000 different things. And that once, and he actually compared it to World War II. Basically, she has used that analogy. She understands that we'll be able to sell at some point a whole of society warlike mobilization to do everything, right? To fix our transport, to redress racial justice, to do all the things that you actually have to do just to fight climate. And he says she understands, and once she's able to do that, there's nothing they won't be able to do, right? And so I think about that a lot, and I hope he is as well in his little cell.
You know, I wish I could share that optimism of Steve Bannon. I mean, that's an incredibly hopeful view. We lost a few minutes. We have a few minutes left. So let's go to another question and really succinct, if possible. Thank you. Up there.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth. I'm a 16-year-old girl, and I've been watching my country change and evolve over the years. But my question for you is, how can you tell when democracy is changing, especially when you're talking about the pro-democracy movement? How can you tell when democracy is changing, and how can you protect your democracy and make sure it doesn't like slip into the hands of like our government?
I think the riot was one strong indication on January 6th, but there are obviously a lot of deeper and more pervasive indicators as well, right?
There's first of all, the signs, like symptoms, right? It's become increasingly normal for people to run for office on the program of throwing out election results, which has all kinds of layers of irony. But that's not a fringe thing anymore. I think most Republicans running for Congress right now say the election was stolen in 2020, which it was not. I think another symptom would be mainstream people saying political violence is an acceptable tool for getting the kind of world you want. That's now completely mainstream in one of the two main parties. And then I think there's another way to understand democracy dying, which is more of the whimper than the bang, although we're focused on the bang, January 6th. I think the whimper is like, at some point we all get used to the idea that things most of us want will never happen. And like maybe that's actually what the death of democracy is. Just like, there's just a whole list of things you and I could make of things 80% of us want that we all know will never happen. And so is that a democracy? And the one bigger frame I would put on why it's dying that's incredibly important is I think we have to tell the hopeful story first that explains the revolt against democracy, and what I would call the revolt against the future. The truth is, this country was founded a long time ago on some very lofty promises that it was not brave enough to live up to in full at the time for a whole bunch of people. And in the way that people get better, the country's gotten better. It's gotten truer to itself. It's become more self-aware. It has, acquired more of that courage to be what it promised. And I think it's actually gotten closer in the last few decades than a lot of our ancestors would have imagined. We don't tell ourselves that story enough because we're so focused on rightfully on all the unfinished business. But we've gotten to a place of kind of unimaginable levels of inclusion that like shame our ancestors for all the people living among us that they did not see as human and they did not treat well. And I think when you start there, then you understand what these people are doing on the far right as a revolt against the future. They're not the protagonists of this story. We're not living in their world. They're living in our world. We have actually built an incredible kind of country. We are building an incredible kind of country. And no one on the left says this. No one on the left is proud of this. We're building a country that is made of the world, right? That looks like the world, where people from every kind of background come here, can become American. It's imperfect. We haven't extended it to everybody. We've been flawed. But what we are doing, what we are attempting, is awesome. It's literally awesome. It's an awesome goal. France isn't trying it. Germany isn't. Those are all white countries with guest populations, if you actually spend time there.
So America, stay amazing.
Stay amazing, America.
Stay
amazing.
I think we have the bumper sticker.
Yes.
Can we get one more question in? I think maybe.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time. My name is Raj. So I work in the field of artificial intelligence. And in 5 years, it's going to be very disruptive in the world. So when you wrote the book, and David, in your books too, AI allows the ability, as it's being used today, to kind of reinforce these echo chambers, right? And if you look at COVID, we become more isolated as a society, where if you look at the 60s and 70s, even the 80s, you had neighborhood clubs, people would go to the local tap, and you'd have these discussions. But as we live more in our phones and we lack that face-to-face contact to have these conversations, how do we utilize technology to kind of bring us together as opposed has been used to divide us over the past 10 years?
I think you should be the next speaker for a whole hour.
Yeah.
But there's a big and a small question there. And the big one is the societal impact. But your book ends by addressing this in a small way in terms of something called deep canvassing. So maybe this would be a good chance for you to give a 2-minute description of that.
I love your question, but I want to say, I don't think AI, and I'm not the AI expert, but I would just say this about any tool. I don't think AI is any more naturally tending towards dystopia, you know, then a hammer is naturally tending towards like beating someone on the head, you know? It is always humans who choose to use these things in good ways or bad ways. When I see Silicon Valley in particular, I see a bunch of like very limited, morally limited men who own these tools. And like, to me, the AI we've gotten has to do with like Mark Zuckerberg's like a small limited man. I'm just serious. He's not, I don't even know, he's just limited. Like Elon Musk is just limited, right? And so, like the people who built YouTube, they're just limited. I meet them socially, I know them, like they're fine at like the thing they do. They're often like very little understanding of people. And so when you're in charge of like how should people learn or things like that, and the people in charge of friendship, like have no friends, and you know, that kind of thing, it's just a like, massive misallocation of, you know. And I think we need people to use these tools for good things. Is there AI? I don't know the technical answer, but I would venture that there's AI that can make people find common ground and have better conversations with each other, and not only AI that can make people dunk on each other. I don't imagine what there could be intrinsically in technology that makes, you know, the former impossible. And you're right, David, that there is this incredible thing called deep canvassing that is the antidote to those silos. And if I've persuaded you today to find things you can do, because we can't just wait for Joe Biden to start doing, you know, things that he's not doing, although he needs to do that. I'm sure all of you want to find ways to do things, right? Like, you know, excuse my language, but like, fuck despair. Like, I am so tired of despairing for the last 7 years. Like, I'm ready for something else, and I trust many of you are ready for something else. So here's the thing you can go do. You can go look it up, you can go train yourself in a few hours online, and then you can go do it. And it's called deep canvassing. And it is a remarkable experiment that grew out of the gay rights movement in California, where they realized their own friends and neighbors were voting against them on gay marriage. And they said, we want to go knock on their doors. Not all gay people. I mean, it's totally normal to absolutely not want to go knock on the doors of people who are against you. And that's probably most reasonable people's stance. But some minority of them wanted to go find out what's going on there. And thus began this experiment that was going to doors, knocking on the door, not giving a flyer and leaving in 10 seconds, which is the canvassing you know, staying for 30, 40 minutes. And it has become this mass persuasion project that is happening in all 50 states in this country, led by organizations like People's Action and others, where you go and you elicit from people. You listen, you strategically listen. Why do you feel that way about gay people? Why do you feel that way about immigrants? And then people say some obnoxious things sometimes. And in a way that even made me feel like complicit just standing there, you don't call it out at that moment. Oh, you got some bile coming out of you. Do you have any more bile? I would be interested if there was more bile behind that bile. You got any more bile? Yeah, no, please, I have this whole bucket. Just please, give me your bile. Right? And it's the opposite of Twitter culture. It's the opposite of what those algorithms, it's just like calling in instead of calling out. Right? Not because you're weak on your, those canvassers, no one can tell those canvassers they don't care about immigrants or like they are those things in many cases, right? But they're strategics. They listen. They pull it out of you, all the prejudices. And then they start to do the thing that really works, that made deep canvassing revolutionary. They start to look for sources of dissonance within you with your own stance. Not trying to implant some microchip of their conviction in you, and if you've been married, you know that doesn't work. But trying to say, okay, you feel that way about immigrants. You feel immigrants are lazy. You feel trans people are a danger to your kids. Okay. Do you also feel other ways about, like, maybe you're a champion of underdogs, and you really self-identify as someone who's always pulling for the underdog in a situation. You're a lifelong Mets fan. And what these people have found, it may sound improbable, but they've done it, and it's been the subject of peer-reviewed studies. They have found that playing up that identity of I'm a champion of underdogs and getting people to realize, well, what you're saying on immigration is not consistent with your view that you stand up for people knocked down and counted out. Or what you're saying about trans people doesn't square or violates the fact that when you moved to LA, is a real example I saw in a beautiful canvassing video, when you moved to LA, you were treated like crap by your coworkers because you didn't belong in LA. and that was the hardest moment of your life that you remember. How does that square with how you've been treating your trans niece? And you see this woman go, oh shit, what have I done to my niece? And if I leave you with one thought, it's that in an age of polarization, we have been lulled, with some Russian help, into thinking that the other side is simple, monolithic, only has one story about them. We know we're complicated. We know we're like a roiling contest of feelings all the time. You have what you think about immigration, but you also think other things. You have B-sides. Well, everybody has B-sides, or a lot of people have B-sides. And I am so grateful that we're living in a time where there are these organizers, these persuaders around the country who are refusing the great write-off that so many of us have participated in. Those people will never change. They voted for this, they voted for that. Let them be. There's a group of us, a group among us, who is pursuing the idea that people have a second story in them, that people have these sources of dissonance. And if you strategically, empathetically, always pragmatically, these people are trying to win. They're not trying to have beautiful conversations. But if you approach in that spirit, you can move minds. They are doing it. They show it's possible. And I think it's just one example of what is at the heart of this book, which is that if you believe people can change, you still believe in democracy. If you believe people cannot change, you are actually asking to be ruled by force and by tyranny. And I think it is as dark as this moment feels. It is incredibly possible, plausible, for us to wrest back the kind of mantle of progress and change, celebrate the accomplishments of the pro-democracy, pro-human rights side, tell the better story about America, build a more exciting movement, command attention, galvanize people, and win. And I think we will. And I hope you all find ways to become better persuaders in your own life and communities as well.
I know a lot of you out there are always looking for hope in these times. You just got a good heaping portion of it. You can get more if you buy his book. He will be signing it. You can get more historical background and context if you buy my book. Maybe a little less hope, but understanding leads to hope. Also, Anand, as do I, he has a newsletter. Tell people how they can sign up for yours, and then I'll tell them how they can sign up for mine.
Mine is called The.Ink. We have any The.Ink subscribers here? Yes. Thank you for being here. Everyone else is, I like you being here also. So you can go to The.Ink, very simple website, and it's, a free newsletter with all kinds of interviews and discussions of this subject.
And mine is called Our Land, and you can get that if you go to davidkorn.com. So thank you all for coming. Thank you to the Chicago Humanities Festival, one of my favorite festivals. And thank you to Chicago.
Thank you so much.